Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn's A World Split Apart, Commencement Address delivered at Harvard University, June 8, 1978. I am sincerely happy to be here with you on the occasion of the 327th commencement of this old and illustrious university. My congratulations and best wishes to all of today's graduates. Harvard's motto is Veritas. Many of you have already found out, and others will find out in the course of their lives, that truth eludes us as soon as our concentration begins to flag, all the while leaving the illusion that we are continuing to pursue it. This is the source of much discord. Also, truth is seldom sweet. It is almost invariably bitter. A measure of bitter truth is included in my speech today, but I offer it as a friend, not as an adversary. 3 years ago in the United States, I said certain things that were rejected and appeared unacceptable. Today, however, many people agree with what I then said. The split in today's world is perceptible even to a hasty glance. Any of our contemporaries readily identifies two world powers, each of them already capable of utterly destroying the other. However, the understanding of the split too often is limited to this political conception, the illusion according to which danger may be abolished through successful diplomatic negotiations or by achieving a balance of armed forces. The truth is that the split is both more profound and more alienating, that the rifts are more numerous than one can see at first glance. These deep, manifold splits bear the danger of equally manifold disaster for all of us, in accordance with the ancient truth that a kingdom, in this case our earth, divided against itself cannot stand. Contemporary worlds. There is the concept of the third world. Thus, we already have 3 worlds. Undoubtedly, however, the number is even greater. We are just too far away to see. Every ancient and deeply rooted self-contained culture, especially if it is spread over a wide part of the Earth's surface, constitutes a self-contained world full of riddles and surprises to Western thinking. As a minimum, we must include in this category China, India, the Muslim world, and Africa, if indeed we accept the approximation of viewing the latter two as uniform. For 1,000 years, Russia belonged to such a category, although Western thinking systematically committed the mistake of denying its special character and therefore never understood it, just as today the West does not understand Russia in communist captivity. And while it may be that in past years Japan has increasingly become, in effect, a far West, drawing ever closer to Western ways, I am no judge here. Israel, I think, should not be reckoned as part of the West, if only because of its decisive circumstance that its state system is fundamentally linked to religion. How short a time ago, relatively, the small world of modern Europe was easily seizing colonies all over the globe, but only without anticipating any real resistance, and usually with contempt for any possible values in the conquered people's approach to life. It all seemed an overwhelming success with no geographic limits. Western society expanded in a triumph of human independence and power, and all of a sudden, the 20th century brought the clear realization of this society's fragility. We now see that the conquest proved to be short-lived and precarious, and this in turn points to defects in the Western view of the world which led to these conquests. Relations with the former colonial world now have switched to the opposite extreme, and the Western world often exhibits an excess of obsequiousness which is difficult yet to estimate the size of the bill which former colonial countries will present to the West, and it is difficult to predict whether the surrender not only of its last colonies, but of everything it owns will be sufficient for the West to clear this account. Convergence. But the persisting blindness of superiority continues to hold the belief that all the vast regions of our planet should develop and mature to the level of contemporary Western systems. The best in the theory and the most attractive in practice, that all those other worlds are but temporarily prevented by wicked leaders or by severe crisis, or by their own barbarity and incomprehension, from pursuing Western pluralistic democracy and adopting the Western way of life. Countries are judged on the merit of their progress in that direction, but in fact such a conception is a fruit of Western incomprehension of the essence of other worlds, a result of mistakenly measuring them all with a Western yardstick. The real picture of our planet's development bears little resemblance to all this. The anguish of a divided world gave birth to the theory of convergence between the leading Western countries and the Soviet Union. It is a soothing theory which overlooks the fact that these worlds are not at all evolving toward each other and that neither one can be transformed into the other without violence. Besides, convergence inevitably means acceptance of the other side's defects too, and this can hardly suit anyone. If I were today addressing an audience in my country, in my examination of the overall pattern of the world's rifts, I would have concentrated on the calamities of the East, but since my forced exile in the West has now lasted 4 years, and since my audience is a Western one, I think it may be of a greater interest to concentrate on certain aspects of the contemporary West, such as I see them. A decline in courage. A decline in courage may be the most striking feature that an outside observer notices in the West today. The Western world has lost its civic courage, both as a whole and separately, in each country, in each government, in each political party, and of course in the United Nations. Such a decline in courage is particularly noticeable among the ruling and intellectual elites, causing an impression of a loss of courage by the entire society. There remain many courageous individuals, but they have no determining influence on public life. Political and intellectual functionaries exhibit this depression, passivity, and perplexity in their actions and in their statements, and even more so in their self-serving rationales as to how realistic, reasonable, and intellectually and even morally justified it is to base state policies on weakness and cowardice. And the decline in courage, at times attaining what could be termed a lack of manhood, is ironically emphasized by occasional outbursts of boldness and inflexibility on the part of those same functionaries when dealing with weak governments and with countries that lack support or with doomed currents which clearly cannot offer any resistance, but they get tongue-tied and paralyzed when they deal with powerful governments and threatening forces, with aggressors and international terrorists. Must one point out that from ancient times a decline in courage has been considered the first symptom of the end? Well-being. When the modern Western states were being formed, it was proclaimed as a principle that governments are meant to serve man and that man lives in order to be free and pursue happiness. See, for example, the American Declaration of Independence. Now at last, during past decades, technical and social progress has permitted the realization of such aspirations, the welfare state. Every citizen has been granted the desired freedom and material goods in such quantity and of such quality as to guarantee in theory the achievement of happiness in the debased sense of the word, which has come into being during those same decades. In the process, however, one psychological detail has been overlooked: the constant desire to have still more things and a still better life, and the struggle to this end imprint many Western faces with worry and even depression, though it is customary to carefully conceal such feelings. This active, intense competition comes to dominate all human thought and does not in the least open a way to free spiritual development. The individual's independence from many types of state pressure has been guaranteed. The majority of the people have been granted well-being to an extent their fathers and grandfathers could not even dream about. It has become possible to raise young people according to these ideals, preparing them for the summoning them toward physical bloom, happiness, the possession of material goods, money, and leisure, toward an almost unlimited freedom in the choice of pleasures. So, who should now renounce all this? Why, and for the sake of what, should one risk one's precious life in defense of the common good, and particularly in the nebulous case when the security of one's nation must be defended in an as yet distant land? Even biology tells us that a high degree of habitual well-being is not advantageous to a living organism. Today, well-being in the life of Western society has begun to take off its pernicious mask. Legalistic life. Western society has chosen for itself the organization best suited to its purposes, and one I might call legalistic. The limits of human rights and rightness are determined by a system of laws. Such limits are very broad. People in the West have acquired considerable skill in using, interpreting, and manipulating law, though law tends to be too complicated for an average person to understand without the help of an expert. Every conflict is solved according to the letter of the law, and this is considered to be the ultimate solution. If one is right from a legal point of view, nothing more is required. Nobody may mention that one could still not be entirely right and urge self-restraint or a renunciation of these rights, call for sacrifice and selfless risk. This would simply sound absurd. Voluntary self-restraint is almost unheard of. Everybody strives toward further expansion to the extreme limit of the legal frames. An oil company is legally blameless when it buys up an invention of a new type of energy in order to prevent its use. A food product manufacturer is legally blameless when he poisons his produce to make it last longer. After all, people are free not to purchase it. I have spent all my life under a communist regime, and I will tell you that a society without any objective legal scale is a terrible one indeed. But a society with no other scale but the legal one is also less than worthy of man. A society based on the letter of the law and never reaching any higher fails to take advantage of the full range of human possibilities. The letter of the law is too cold and formal to have a beneficial influence on society. Whenever the tissue of life is woven of legalistic relationships, this creates an atmosphere of spiritual mediocrity that paralyzes man's noblest impulses. And it will be simply impossible to bear up to the trials of this threatening century with nothing but the supports of a legalistic structure. The direction of freedom. Today's Western society has revealed the inequality between the freedom for good deeds and the freedom for evil deeds. A statesman who wants to achieve something important and highly constructive for his country has to move cautiously and even timidly. Thousands of hasty and irresponsible critics cling to him all the time. He is constantly rebuffed by Parliament and the press. He has to prove that his every step is well-founded and absolutely flawless. Indeed, an outstanding, truly great person who has unusual and unexpected initiatives in mind does not get any chance to assert himself. Dozens of traps will be set for him from the beginning. Thus, mediocrity triumphs under the guise of democratic restraints. It is feasible and easy everywhere to undermine administrative power, and it has in fact been drastically weakened in all Western countries. The defense of individual rights has reached such extremes as to make society as a whole defenseless against certain individuals. It is time in the West to defend not so much human rights as human obligations. On the other hand, destructive and irresponsible freedom has been granted boundless space. Society has turned out to have scarce defense against the abyss of human decadence, for example, against the misuse of liberty for moral violence against young people, such as motion pictures full of pornography, crime, and horror. This is all considered to be part of freedom and to be counterbalanced in theory by the young people's right not to look and not to accept. Life organized legalistically has thus shown its inability to defend itself against the corrosion of evil. And what shall we say about the dark realms of overt criminality? Legal limits, especially in the United States, are broad enough to encourage not only individual freedom, but also some misuse of such freedom. The culprit can go unpunished or obtain undeserved leniency, all with the support of thousands of defenders in the society. When a government earnestly undertakes to root out terrorism, public opinion immediately accuses it of violating the terrorist's civil rights. There is quite a number of such cases. This tilt of freedom toward evil has come about gradually, but it evidently stems from a humanistic and benevolent concept according to which man, the master of this world, does not bear any evil within himself, and all the defects of life are caused by misguided social systems, which must therefore be corrected. Yet, strangely enough, through the best social conditions have been achieved in the West, and there still remains a great deal of crime. There even is considerably more of it than in the destitute and lawless Soviet society. There is a multitude of prisoners in our camps who are termed criminals, but most of them never committed any crime. They merely tried to defend themselves against a lawless state by resorting to means outside the legal framework.